The sound of tearing silk echoed through the hushed ballroom, sharper than a gunshot. All eyes snapped towards the source, Bianca Vance, her face a mask of cruel triumph, holding a shredded piece of emerald fabric. Before her stood a simple waitress, her uniform now hanging in tatters, exposing the delicate skin of her shoulder. "That's what you get for bumping into me, trash," Bianca hissed, her voice dripping with venom. The waitress didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply met Bianca's gaze with an unnervingly calm fire in her eyes. The crowd murmured, unaware they were witnessing the spark that would ignite an empire's war. They saw a waitress being humiliated, but they had no idea she was Anya Sterling, and that her husband, the most powerful and ruthless man in the city, was watching from the shadows. The Valerius Grand Hotel's ballroom was a galaxy of artificial stars. Crystals dripped from the ceiling in shimmering chandeliers, casting a fractured diamond-like glow upon the city's elite. It was the annual Starlight Foundation Charity Gala, an event where fortunes were pledged on champagne-fueled whims and reputations were made or shattered between the amuse-bouche and the dessert course. Men in bespoke Tom Ford tuxedos, their wrists heavy with Patek Philippe watches, navigated the throngs of women poured into couture gowns that cost more than a suburban home. It was a jungle of silk and ambition, and tonight Anya Petrova was merely part of the scenery. Her uniform was a crisp black tailor-made dress, simple but elegant, a stark contrast to the peacocking finery around her. A small discreet earpiece was tucked behind her ear, her only link to the security detail she had insisted on leaving outside the main hall. To everyone here, she was just one of the dozens of catering staff hired for the evening, efficient, silent, and utterly invisible. And that was precisely how she wanted it. From her vantage point, near a towering floral arrangement of white orchids and hydrangeas, she had a clear view of the main dais. Her eyes, a unique shade of stormy grey, missed nothing. She tracked the subtle shifts in power, the whispered deals masked by polite smiles, the predatory glint in the eyes of corporate raiders circling their next target. This world was a game, one she knew how to play better than most, even from the sidelines. Her gaze eventually settled on a couple holding court near the center of the room. Damien Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Innovations, was a man who wore his ambition like a second skin. He had a classic, camera-ready charm, a sharp jawline, perfectly coiffed dark hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the golden boy of the tech world, his company's recent IPO, making him the city's newest, most talked-about magnate. Clinging to his arm, practically dripping in Cartier diamonds, was Bianca Vance. Bianca was the daughter of media mogul Robert Vance, and she moved with the entitled grace of someone who had never been told no in her life. Her gown was a fiery red Marchesa creation that demanded attention, its fabric shimmering under the lights as she laughed a tinkling artificial sound. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but there was a hardness in her sapphire eyes, a perpetual sneer playing on her perfectly painted lips that marred the image. Anya had been observing them for the better part of an hour. Damien was her husband's younger cousin, the festering wound in the Sterling family's side. The two branches of the family had been locked in a cold war for decades, ever since Damien's father had tried to stage a hostile takeover of the main family business, Sterling Enterprises. He had failed spectacularly, banished from the core empire, and left with a modest tech startup as a consolation prize. Damien had inherited that startup and his father's burning resentment, clawing his way back into the spotlight with a relentless, single-minded focus. Another glass of the Haut-9 Dom Perignon. Bianca snapped her fingers, clicking impatiently in the air without even bothering to look at the waitress who approached her. Anya kept her expression neutral, her movements fluid and professional, as she picked up an empty flute from Bianca's table. Right away, Madame Anya said, her voice soft and even. Bianca finally turned her head, her eyes narrowing, as she took in Anya's face. It was a fleeting, dismissive glance, the kind one gives to furniture. Yet for a split second, something flickered in Bianca's expression, a primal female assessment. Anya was not conventionally beautiful in the way Bianca was. Her features were stronger, her cheekbones high and sharp, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, simple knot. But there was a poise to her, an innate confidence in her posture that no uniform could hide. She was a still lake in a room full of crashing waves, and it was unsettling. "You're new," Bianca stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. "I don't recognize you. I was hired by the hotel for the event," Madame Anya replied, calmly refusing to be baited. Damien, ever the politician, gave Anya a cursory, charming smile. "Bianca, darling, let's not trouble the staff. We should go say hello to Mr. Blackwood." He placed a hand on the small of Bianca's back, but she shrugged it off, her eyes still fixed on Anya. "See that you're quicker this time," Bianca said, turning her back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. The insult was clear. "You are beneath my notice, but your service is still unsatisfactory." Anya retreated towards the bar, her composure a perfect, impenetrable mask. She wasn't angry. Bianca Vance was a gnat, a minor annoyance. This job, this disguise, was a necessity. Her husband, Adrian Sterling, was a man who collected enemies as easily as other billionaires collected art. He was a phantom, a whisper in boardrooms, a man whose true face was known to very few. His power was absolute, but silent. To protect him, and to protect herself, Anya had cultivated a life of near anonymity. Their marriage, a quiet ceremony, performed by a justice of the peace 2 years ago, was their most closely guarded secret. Tonight, Adrian was supposed to be in Zurich, finalizing a deal that would cripple one of his biggest rivals. Anya had taken the catering job as a way to observe Damien. Adrian had heard whispers that his cousin was getting reckless, making promises to dangerous investors that he couldn't possibly keep. Anya's sharp eye for detail and her ability to blend in made her the perfect reconnaissance tool. She could gather information unfiltered by the sycophants and yes-men who surrounded people like Damien. She returned with the champagne, placing it on the table with a steady hand. Bianca ignored her completely, now engrossed in a conversation with a portly man in finance. Anya began to move away, her mission for the moment complete. She had seen the desperation behind Damien's confident facade, the way his eyes darted around the room, constantly searching, constantly calculating. He was in over his head. That was the information she needed. As she turned to navigate through a cluster of guests, her path was suddenly blocked. Bianca Vance stood before her, her expression petulant. "Excuse me, madam," Anya said, attempting to sidestep. "You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you?" Bianca's voice was low, but it carried an edge of steel. In reality, Bianca hadn't been talking to her at all. Anya paused, confused. "My apologies. I thought you were finished." "I'm finished when I say I'm finished," Bianca sneered. "I was watching you. You've been staring at my fiancé all night." The accusation was so absurd that Anya almost broke character. She had been watching Damien, yes, but as a target, not an object of desire. To Bianca, however, every woman was a potential rival, every glance a challenge to her sovereignty. "I assure you, madam, I was only doing my job," Anya said, her voice remaining placid. "Your job is to be invisible, not to ogle the guests." Bianca took a deliberate step closer, invading Anya's personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's Joy, was cloying and overwhelming. "I know your type. You see a man with money, and you think you can bat your eyelashes and work your way into his bed. Let me tell you something. Damien is mine. A little gutter rat like you wouldn't even be a momentary distraction. The entire exchange was happening in a bubble of perceived privacy, shielded by the noise of the gala. But people were starting to notice. The conversation around them lulled slightly. Damien, seeing the brewing confrontation, began to move toward them, a look of weary annoyance on his face. He knew Bianca's temper. "Bianca, come on," he said, trying to take her arm. "You're making a scene." She started it. Bianca snapped, yanking her arm away. Her eyes, wild and furious, darted back to Anya. She needed a target for her misplaced insecurity, and the silent, composed waitress was the perfect one. "You think you're better than me, don't you, with your quiet little judgments?" Before Anya could respond, before Damien could intervene, Bianca's hand shot out. It wasn't a slap. It was something more deliberate, more humiliating. Her manicured fingers adorned with a massive sapphire ring, hooked into the neckline of Anya's simple emerald dress, the dress she'd worn under her uniform for a quick change later. The fabric was delicate silk, a private indulgence. With a vicious tug, Bianca ripped it downwards. The sound was shockingly loud in the relative quiet that had fallen around them, a sharp, grating rip that sliced through the murmurs of the gala. For a frozen moment, no one moved. The torn emerald silk gaped open, exposing Anya's collarbone and the top of her shoulder in a jagged line. The uniform jacket she'd been wearing was now pulled askew, the damage beneath it stark and violent. It was an act of such calculated cruelty, designed for maximum humiliation. It wasn't just an attack on a waitress. It was a branding, a public declaration of status. "I can destroy you, and you are powerless to stop me." Bianca Vance stood back, her chest heaving slightly, a triumphant, ugly smirk on her face. She held up the torn scrap of fabric like a trophy. There, she said, her voice ringing with satisfaction. "Now your dress looks as cheap as you are." A collective gasp went through the nearest onlookers. This was beyond the pale, even for the cutthroat world of the city's elite. Damien's face went from annoyed to horrified. This wasn't just a scene. It was a potential PR catastrophe. He grabbed Bianca's arm this time with force. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. But Anya didn't look at him. She didn't look at the shocked faces in the crowd or the pitying glances from the other staff members who were frozen in place, terrified of being drawn into the fray. She didn't even look at the ruined fabric of her dress. Her stormy grey eyes were locked on Bianca. There was no fear in them, no tears, no shame, no anger. There was only a profound, chilling calm. It was the calm of a dormant volcano, a placid surface hiding an immense, molten core of power. She didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She simply stood there, her posture perfect, her gaze unwavering, and let Bianca's pathetic victory hang in the air and rot. This unnerving composure seemed to infuriate Bianca more than any outburst would have. She had expected hysterics, a satisfying crumble. The waitress's stoicism was an act of defiance. "What's the matter?" Bianca taunted, her voice rising. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you too stupid to even realize what just happened? Go on, run to your manager. Cry. See what happens. I'll have you fired before you can even file a complaint. I'll make sure you never work in this city again, not even as a dishwasher." Anya finally moved. With slow, deliberate grace, she reached up and gently took the shredded piece of silk from Bianca's fingers. Bianca was so surprised by the move that she let it go. Anya looked down at the fabric in her hand, her expression unreadable. The dress had been a gift from Adrian, custom-made by a small, independent designer in Milan she admired. It was one of her favorites. A quiet pang of sadness went through her, but she walled it off. It was just a thing. Things could be replaced. Dignity once lost was much harder to recover. She folded the small piece of silk, neatly, her movements precise and unhurried. Then she tucked it into the pocket of her apron. Finally, she looked back at Bianca, and for the first time, she spoke in a voice that was no longer soft and subservient. It was clear, measured, and resonated with an authority that was utterly out of place for a waitress. "You are making a very serious mistake," Anya said. The shift in her tone was so abrupt, so complete, that it startled everyone who heard it. The deference was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a physicist explaining the law of gravity. Damien felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down his spine. He looked at the waitress, really looked at her for the first time. The uniform, the serving tray, the quiet demeanor. It was all a costume. Beneath it there was something else, something formidable. He didn't know what it was, but his instincts, honed in treacherous boardrooms, were screaming at him that Bianca had just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a skyscraper. A mistake. Bianca laughed, a shrill, brittle sound. "Threatening me? Oh, this is rich. Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are." "Bianca Vance," Anya replied, her voice still level. "You are the daughter of Robert Vance. You have a trust fund valued at approximately $90 million, a media degree from a university your father endowed, and a reputation for being volatile and cruel. Your greatest accomplishment to date is being photographed at events like this one." The detailed clinical recitation stunned Bianca into silence. The crowd murmured their interest, now fully piqued. This was no longer just a socialite bullying a server. This was something else entirely. How do you know that?" Bianca stammered, her bravado faltering. Anya gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "That's not the important question," she said. "The important question is, do you have any idea who I am?" Before Bianca could formulate a suitably scathing reply, a new voice cut through the tension. It was deep quiet, and carried an unmistakable weight of command that silenced the entire ballroom instantly. "I believe that's an excellent question." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A man was approaching, walking with an unhurried, predatory grace. He wasn't as overtly handsome as Damien. His features were sharper, more severe. He was taller, dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his stark white shirt undone. He wore no ostentatious jewelry, only a simple, elegant watch with a black leather strap. But power radiated from him, like heat from a furnace. He was the center of gravity in any room he entered, and right now the entire ballroom was caught in his orbit. Anya's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something relief, annoyance, love passed through her eyes. Damien Sterling's face went bone white. His blood ran cold. Of all the people who could have witnessed this debacle, it had to be him. Adrian Damien choked out his voice, barely a whisper. The man Adrian Sterling didn't even glance at his cousin. His eyes, the color of cold steel, were fixed on Bianca Vance. And then they moved to Anya, taking in the torn dress, her exposed shoulder, and her unshakable composure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian Sterling, the reclusive, almost mythical head of the vast Sterling Enterprises, the man they called the Shadow King of Wall Street, had just entered the game, and he looked absolutely furious. Adrian Sterling's presence changed the very atmosphere of the room. The background chatter ceased completely, the string quartet faltered into silence, and the air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. He was a man who rarely made public appearances, preferring to pull the strings of his global empire from the seclusion of his penthouse office. To see him here at an event he would typically disdain as frivolous was a shock. To see him striding into the center of a tawdry confrontation was utterly unthinkable. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze a physical force. It swept over Bianca, and she visibly withered under its intensity. The sneering, confident socialite was gone, replaced by a frightened girl who suddenly understood she had wandered into a lion's den. His eyes then shifted to Damien, and the look he gave his cousin was one of pure, undiluted contempt. It was a look that said, "You are an embarrassment to my name." Damien swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with a sudden sweat. "Adrian," he repeated, trying to inject some confidence into his voice and failing miserably. We didn't expect to see you here." Clearly Adrian replied, his voice a low baritone that was both smooth and menacing. He still hadn't looked at Anya directly, but his entire posture was protective, his body angled slightly, as if to shield her from the others. I was under the impression this was a charity event, a place for philanthropy, not for public displays of barbarism. Every word was precise, clipped and lethal. He turned his steely gaze back to Bianca, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "You," he said the single word, cracking like a whip. "You tore her dress." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Bianca opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words failed her. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so seismically, that her entire worldview had been shattered in the span of 30 seconds. This man wasn't someone she could intimidate, not someone her father's name could influence. This was a different level of power altogether, a primal, absolute authority she had never encountered before. It was an accident she finally managed to stammer the lie, flimsy and pathetic even to her own ears. Adrian's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. It was a chilling, predatory expression. "An accident," he repeated softly. "You accidentally hooked your fingers into her neckline and accidentally ripped it open. An impressive lack of motor control. Perhaps you should see a doctor." A few nervous titters rippled through the onlookers. The humiliation was exquisite, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Damien, seeing Bianca flounder, felt a desperate need to regain control. This was his event, his moment in the spotlight, and his cousin was hijacking it, turning it into a public execution. "Look, Adrian," he started, stepping forward. "This is just a misunderstanding. The waitress was being rude and Bianca, she overreacted. It's been handled. There's no need for you to get involved." Adrian finally turned his head to look at Damien properly. The sheer force of his focus made Damien take an involuntary step back. "Involved, Adrian," said his voice, dangerously soft. "You seem to be under the misapprehension that this is your affair to handle. You are also under the misapprehension that you are in any position to tell me what I should or should not do." He took a step closer to his cousin. "Let me correct both of those errors. Everything that happens to this woman," he gestured almost imperceptibly towards Anya, "involves me. And you, little cousin, will never be in a position to tell me anything." The possessive, definitive statement hung in the air, sparking a wildfire of speculation. Who was this waitress? Why would Adrian Sterling, a man who commanded armies of lawyers and executives, personally intervene for a member of the catering staff? The whispers started quiet and frantic. Was she a former employee, a distant relative, a secret informant? No one could fathom the truth. Anya, meanwhile, remained silent. She watched Adrian, a complicated mix of emotions swirling within her. She was frustrated that he had blown his cover. Their anonymity was their shield. But she was also undeniably moved by his immediate, unequivocal defense of her. He hadn't asked what happened. He hadn't waited for an explanation. He had seen her in distress and had come to her consequences. Be damned. She finally met his eyes, and in that silent, fleeting glance, a whole conversation passed between them. "Are you all right?" his eyes asked. "I'm fine," hers answered. "But you shouldn't be here." Too late, his gaze seemed to say, with a hint of grim satisfaction. Adrian turned his attention back to the mess at hand. His eyes fell on the torn dress again, and a muscle in his jaw clenched. He shrugged off his suit jacket, the movement fluid and elegant. The jacket was a masterpiece of tailoring worth more than most people's cars. He walked over to Anya, and with a gentleness that stunned the onlookers, draped it over her shoulders. It was far too large for her, but the gesture was so tender, so intimate, that it sent a fresh wave of shock through the ballroom. He was covering her, protecting her, claiming her in a way that was more powerful than any words. The jacket smelled of him, a clean, subtle scent of bergamot and cedarwood. It was a familiar comfort, an anchor in the storm. Anya pulled it tighter around herself, the expensive wool warm against her skin. "Mr. Blackwood," Adrian's voice boomed, summoning the flustered event organizer, who had been hovering helplessly on the sidelines. A portly, balding man scurried forward, his face beaded with sweat. "Mr. Sterling, an honor." "Is there a problem?" "There is," Adrian said coolly. "My associate," he chose the word carefully, "has been assaulted by one of your guests. Her clothing has been destroyed. I trust the Valerius Grand Hotel has a protocol for such things. I also trust you have excellent security cameras." Blackwood's eyes widened in terror. A lawsuit from Adrian Sterling would not just bankrupt the hotel, it would erase it from the map. "Yes, of course, Mr. Sterling. Absolutely. We will handle everything. The police should be called immediately." "No police," Adrian commanded, his voice dropping again. "This will not be a media circus. This will be handled privately. But it will be handled. As for your guests," his eyes sliced back to Damien and Bianca, "I believe they were just leaving." Damien's jaw dropped. "Leaving? We're not leaving. I'm a platinum sponsor of this event." Where Adrian corrected him, a chilling finality in his tone. "Your sponsorship is no longer required, nor is your presence. Get out." It was the ultimate power play. In his own world, Damien Sterling was a king. He graced magazine covers and rang the opening bell at the stock exchange. But in Adrian's world he was nothing, a gnat to be swatted away. Humiliation burned in Damien's cheeks. He was being thrown out of his own party, in front of his investors and peers, by the man he hated most in the world. And all because his girlfriend had decided to bully a waitress. A waitress who, for some terrifying and unknown reason, was under the personal protection of the Shadow King. Bianca, finally seeming to grasp the magnitude of her blunder, grabbed Damien's arm. "Damien, let's just go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Damien was trapped. To leave was to admit defeat, to crawl away with his tail between his legs. To stay was to defy Adrian Sterling, a man who had financially ruined nations for lesser insults. As he stood there, paralyzed by indecision, Adrian delivered the final devastating blow. He turned to Anya, his expression softening, almost imperceptibly, as he looked at her. "Are you ready to go home, darling?" he asked. The word darling dropped into the silence like a perfectly cut diamond. It was intimate, affectionate, and utterly unambiguous. It shattered every theory the crowd had been entertaining. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't an associate. Anya met his gaze and allowed a small, genuine smile to touch her lips for the first time that night. "Yes, Adrian," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am." Adrian offered her his arm. Anya slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, leaving the oversized suit jacket draped over her shoulders. Together they turned their backs on the stunned couple and the speechless crowd, and began to walk towards the exit, an undisputed king and his mysterious queen, leaving a battlefield of their making. The revelation was about to come, and it would be more explosive than anyone could possibly imagine. As Adrian and Anya walked away, a tidal wave of whispers erupted in their wake. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so outlandish, so impossible, that no one dared to voice it aloud. The powerful, reclusive Adrian Sterling, a man rumored to be married only to his work and a common waitress. It made no sense. Yet the evidence was irrefutable, the raw fury in his eyes, the gentle way he covered her with his jacket, the casual possessive endearment, darling. Damien Sterling stood frozen, his mind racing. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine, a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a child facing his father's wrath. He stared at the back of the waitress, now cloaked in his cousin's $1,000 jacket, walking with a poise that belonged in a royal court, not a hotel kitchen. Who is she? The question hammered in his skull. Bianca was the one who broke the spell. Her mind, unable to process the power shift, defaulted to its usual setting, arrogant denial. "Where do you think you're going?" she shrieked, her voice high and ragged. "You can't just walk away. That waitress works for the hotel. She needs to be fired." Security, her hysterical cries, only served to highlight her complete loss of control. A few guests exchanged looks of pity and disgust. She was a queen deposed, still shouting orders from a throne that had turned to dust beneath her. Adrian and Anya stopped just short of the grand ballroom doors. They didn't turn around. Adrian didn't even deign to look back. He simply paused, a silent final act of dominance, allowing the weight of Bianca's desperation to hang in the air and suffocate her. It was Anya who turned. She pivoted slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. The oversized jacket slipped slightly, revealing the torn emerald silk one last time. Her face was serene, but her stormy grey eyes were alight with a cold, bright fire. She looked past the gawking crowd, past a shell-shocked Damien, and settled her gaze directly on Bianca. "He's right, Bianca," Anya said, her voice carrying across the silent room, amplified by the perfect acoustics. "You were asking the wrong question. You asked if I knew who you are." "I do. You asked if I had any idea who he is." She gestured with her head toward Adrian. "I do. But the question you failed to ask, the one you should have started with, is, who am I?" She let the question linger, a final test. Bianca just stared back, her mouth agape comprehension, still stubbornly refusing to dawn. Anya's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "You see, you assaulted a member of the catering staff. You destroyed her property. But you didn't do it in a vacuum. You did it at the Starlight Foundation Gala, an event which, for the last 5 years, has been the single largest beneficiary of the Sterling Family Philanthropic Trust." A new wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. The Sterling Trust was legendary, its endowments vast, and its influence immeasurable. And that trust, Anya continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, is managed by its chairwoman, a woman who prefers to remain anonymous, a woman who occasionally likes to work at these events to see firsthand where the money goes and to ensure the organizations we support are running smoothly. Damien's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of white. He felt the floor drop out from under him. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. He knew the chairwoman of the trust was a closely guarded secret, known only as A.P. Sterling. He'd always assumed it was some elderly aunt, a holdover from a previous generation. Anya took a half-step forward, her presence suddenly immense. "You ripped my dress, Bianca. You called me trash. You threatened my livelihood." She paused, letting each accusation land with the force of a physical blow. "You did all of this in front of my husband." With that final explosive word, she turned back and placed her hand on Adrian's arm. Husband. The word detonated in the ballroom. The shock was palpable, a physical jolt that ran through every single person present. All the whispers, all the speculation, crystallized into a single mind-bending truth. This wasn't a mistress or a secret employee. This was his wife. The invisible waitress was Anya Petrova Sterling, the lady of the Sterling Empire, the secret queen to the Shadow King. Bianca Vance made a small choking sound. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She hadn't just insulted a waitress. She had assaulted the wife of the most dangerous man in their world. She had committed social, professional, and financial suicide in one spectacular hubristic act. Damien felt like he was going to be physically sick. The full scope of the catastrophe crashed down on him. This wasn't just a family embarrassment. Adrian hated him. Adrian had been looking for a reason, any reason, to crush him and his fledgling company. And Bianca, in her infinite arrogant stupidity, had just handed him a declaration of war on a silver platter. She hadn't just ripped a dress. She had torn a hole in the hull of Sterling Innovations, and they were sinking fast. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the crowd. "That's Anya Sterling." The name, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to take on a life of its own. Adrian finally turned his head, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He surveyed the wreckage of his cousin's reputation, his cold eyes missing nothing. He looked at the terrified faces of investors who had backed Damien, now realizing they had bet on the wrong horse. He looked at the gossips and social climbers already composing the story they would dine out on for the next year. Then his gaze fell on Damien. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was crystal clear. "This is the beginning. I will ruin you for this. I will take everything from you, and I will enjoy every second of it." He turned back to Anya, his expression softening once more. "Let's go home, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice laced with a deep, resonating pride. He guided her out of the ballroom, the crowd parting for them in a wave of awed, terrified silence. The grand doors swung shut behind them, leaving a tableau of devastation. Bianca Vance finally succumbed, her legs giving way, as she crumpled to the floor in a heap of red marchesa and ruined ambition sobbing hysterically. Damien Sterling didn't go to her. He stood rooted to the spot, his champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound barely registered over the roaring in his ears. It was the sound of his entire world, everything he had worked for, everything he had built, breaking into a million irreparable pieces. The Shadow King had come into the light, and his first act was to declare war. Damien knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it was a war he could never win. The ride home was silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as the custom bulletproof Bentley sedan glided through the streets. Anya leaned her head against Adrian's shoulder, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly draining away, leaving a profound weariness in its place. The heavy wool of his jacket was a comforting weight. Inside the climate-controlled quiet of the car, the chaos of the ballroom felt a world away. Adrian had one arm wrapped around her, his hand gently stroking her hair. He hadn't said anything since they'd left the hotel, his silence more comforting than any platitude. He was simply there, a solid, unshakable presence. "I'm sorry," Anya finally said, her voice a murmur against his chest. "I know this is exactly the kind of exposure you've always avoided." Adrian tightened his grip slightly. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you ever apologize for what she did to you, or for what I did in response. My only regret is that I wasn't there sooner." His hand clenched into a fist for a moment before he consciously relaxed it. "When I saw her hand on you, I saw red Anya. All I could think about was tearing him and his entire world down. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her heart warmed at his words. I had it under control. He chuckled a rare, soft sound. "Oh, I have no doubt you did. I saw your face. You were about to dismantle her piece by piece without raising your voice. It's one of the things I love about you." But he tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "You shouldn't have to. You are my wife. No one will ever lay a hand on you and get away with it. Not on my watch." The secret of their marriage had been a mutual decision, born of necessity. Adrian's life was a minefield. His business dealings were aggressive and ruthless, earning him powerful enemies across the globe. Anonymity was his armor, and by extension, Anya's. She was his one vulnerability, the single pressure point his enemies could exploit. By living a quiet, unassuming life, she was not just safe. She was his hidden strength. Anya herself was no stranger to a life in the shadows. She was the daughter of a brilliant but disgraced Russian economist who had defected to the States with nothing but the clothes on his back. She'd grown up valuing intellect and resilience over wealth and status. She'd put herself through school earning degrees in finance and art history, and had met Adrian not at a gala, but in a dusty university library, where they were both researching the same obscure 17th century financial bubble. He was drawn to her sharp mind and her utter lack of interest in his name or his fortune. She was drawn to the quiet, brilliant man beneath the intimidating reputation. Their bond was forged in whispered intellectual debates and shared ambitions far from the prying eyes of the world. "This will complicate things," Anya said, thinking of the Sterling Trust and her anonymous work there. "It will be harder to operate now. We'll adapt," Adrian said simply. "Perhaps it's for the best. I'm tired of hiding you, Anya. I'm tired of not being able to show the world the brilliant, incredible woman I married." The animosity with Damien's side of the family ran deep. It wasn't just business. It was blood. Adrian's grandfather had built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up. He had 2 sons, Adrian's father, Richard, who was a visionary like him, and Damien's father, Edward, who was reckless and greedy. When the patriarch died, he left the company to Richard, giving Edward a generous but non-controlling stake. Edward, consumed by jealousy, saw this as an unforgivable slight. He spent years trying to undermine his brother, culminating in a disastrous, hostile takeover attempt funded by shady offshore lenders. The attempt failed, but it nearly destroyed the company. In the fallout, Richard, a man with a heart condition, suffered a fatal stroke. Adrian, then only 22, was forced to step in. He not only saved Sterling Enterprises, but built it into a global behemoth far beyond what his father or grandfather had ever imagined. He did it with a cold, surgical precision, cutting his Uncle Edward out of the family, and the business entirely leaving him, with only the small tech company that would one day become Sterling Innovations. Adrian never forgave his uncle for his father's death, and he saw that same reckless, entitled greed in Damien. He'd allowed his cousin to operate to build his own little empire as long as he stayed out of his way. But tonight, Damien hadn't just crossed a line. He had allowed his fiancée to attack the one person Adrian held sacred. For that, there would be no forgiveness. The car pulled into the private underground garage of their penthouse. As they stepped out, Adrian's head of security, a stoic man named Carter, approached them. Sir Madam Carter said with a respectful nod. "The initial fallout report is coming in. The story is already breaking on social media. The Waitress was a Sterling. It's the #1 trending topic globally." Adrian nodded, as expected. "What's the status of Vance Media?" Their stock is already down 7% in after-hours trading on the Asian markets, Carter reported. Your statement disavowing any future dealings with them has had the desired effect. Robert Vance has been trying to reach you. He's called 12 times in the last hour. Let him sweat, Adrian said coldly. And Sterling Innovations' Panic Carter said with a grim smile. Their primary investors, the Jensen Group and a consortium led by Kenji Tanaka, have both scheduled emergency calls with Damian Sterling for the morning. Our sources say they are looking for an exit clause. They know that a war with Sterling Enterprises is unwinnable. Anya listened, a familiar sense of awe and trepidation washing over her. When Adrian moved, he moved entire mountains. He wasn't just going after Damian. He was systematically dismantling the entire infrastructure that held his cousin's company aloft. They entered the private elevator that opened directly into their apartment. The penthouse was a testament to their shared tastes, vast, minimalist spaces, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, and a collection of priceless art that was both modern and classic. Anya slipped off Adrian's jacket and laid it carefully on a chair. The torn emerald dress felt like a relic from another life. I'm going to change, she said. When she returned, dressed in simple silk pajamas, Adrian was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring down at the glittering city below. He looked like a king surveying his domain. He'll lose everything, Anya said, softly, coming to stand beside him. Yes, Adrian said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He will. He will lose his company, his investors, his reputation. That woman will leave him the second the money dries up. He will be exactly where his father was 30 years ago with nothing. Is that what you want? She asked, searching his profile. He was silent for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. What I want, he said, finally turning to face her, his eyes dark and intense, is for him to understand that there are consequences. He grew up believing the world would bend to his will. His father taught him that. They thought my father was weak. They thought they could take what wasn't theirs. They disrespected our family, our legacy. And tonight, he stood by and watched while his pet viper attacked my wife. He showed the same cowardice, the same weakness of character that his father did. He reached out and gently traced the line of her collarbone, his touch feather-light over the skin that had been exposed by the torn dress. This isn't about business anymore, Anya. This is about honor. He dishonored you, and for that, his entire world must burn. Anya saw the old pain in his eyes, the pain of a young man who had lost his father too soon, who had been forced to become a warrior to protect his family's legacy. Tonight hadn't created a war. It had simply fired the first shot in a war that had been brewing for a generation. She placed her hand over his. Then we'll see it through, she said, her voice firm. Together. Adrian's gaze softened. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, possessive kiss filled with all the anger, fear and love of the night. In that moment, they were not the Shadow King and his secret queen. They were just a husband and wife standing together against the world, ready for the storm they had unleashed. The dawn broke over the city, but for Damian Sterling and Bianca Vance, the world remained dark. The aftermath of the gala was not a slow burn, it was an inferno. By the time the sun was fully up, their names were toxic. The video surreptitiously filmed by a dozen different guests on their phones had gone viral. Every angle was covered. Bianca's sneering face, the shocking sound of ripping silk, Anya's unnerving calm, and the terrifying silent arrival of Adrian Sterling. The narrative was set in stone, a cruel, entitled socialite, and her weak-willed fiancé had publicly attacked a powerful, beloved philanthropist who was working incognito. Anya, the secret Sterling, was an instant folk hero. Bianca was the villain in a real-life fairy tale, and the public was screaming for her head. Bianca's world imploded first. By 7 a.m., she had been dropped by her modeling agency. By 8 a.m., 3 major brands, for which she was a paid ambassador, had publicly terminated her contracts, issuing statements condemning bullying and harassment. Her father, Robert Vance, a man who prided himself on his media savvy, was in full-blown panic mode. Vance Media's stock had plummeted overnight. Advertisers were pulling out. His own board was calling for his resignation for failing to control his daughter, whose actions now threatened their entire corporation. He had called Bianca, screaming at her with a fury she had never experienced. "You foolish, idiotic girl," he had roared over the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just pick a fight with a waitress. You declared war on Adrian Sterling on my behalf. He's going to ruin us." The relationship between Bianca and Damien shattered just as quickly. After a night of bitter, screaming recriminations at Damien's penthouse, where she blamed him for not stopping her, and he blamed her for her monumental stupidity, the end was swift. "You have to fix this. Damien." She had cried, her face blotchy and swollen from hours of weeping. "Call him, apologize. Do something, fix this." Damien laughed a harsh, broken sound. "There is no fixing this. You don't fix a direct insult to Adrian Sterling. He doesn't accept apologies. He accepts total surrender and complete annihilation. My company, my life's work is over, because you couldn't stand the thought of a pretty waitress breathing the same air as you. It was your fault. You were staring at her." Bianca shrieked, falling back on her initial pathetic excuse. That was the final straw. "Get out," Damien said, his voice dead. "Get your things and get out of my apartment. Now." "You can't throw me out," she screeched. "I'm Bianca Vance. You're a liability," he retorted, turning his back on her. "And I'm cutting my losses." For Damien, the situation was far more complex and far more terrifying. His 9 a.m. call with the Jensen Group was a bloodbath. They were invoking the reputational damage clause in their investment contract. They were pulling their funding effective immediately. The call with Kenji Tanaka's consortium was even worse. Tanaka, a man who valued honor and respect above all else, was personally insulted by Damien's association with the incident. "You have brought shame upon yourself, Sterling-san Tanaka," had said his voice, ice cold over the speakerphone. "We can no longer be in business together." By lunchtime, Sterling Innovations had lost over 60% of its market value. A mass exodus of talent began as key engineers and executives, smelling blood in the water, started sending out their resumes. The company was in a death spiral. Desperate, Damien did the one thing he never thought he would do. He drove to the Sterling Enterprises Tower, a monolithic black skyscraper that dominated the city's skyline, and begged for a meeting with his cousin. He was made to wait in the cavernous, intimidating lobby for 3 hours of public humiliation for a CEO who was used to being ushered immediately into any office he chose. Finally, he was summoned to the top floor. The office was larger than his entire apartment, a stark, minimalist space with a single massive oak desk and a breathtaking view of the city. Adrian was not behind the desk. He was standing by the window, looking out his back to the door. "Adrian," Damien began, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for seeing me." Adrian didn't turn around. "I'm not seeing you, Damien. I'm allowing you to speak to my back for 2 minutes. Your time started when the door closed. The cold dismissal was like a slap in the face." Damien swallowed his pride. He was here to beg. "Adrian, I am so sorry. For everything. What Bianca did was unforgivable. I should have stopped her. I was weak. I take full responsibility." "No, you don't," Adrian said, still facing the window. "You take no responsibility. You're just here because your little house of cards is collapsing. You're not sorry for what happened to Anya. You're sorry for what is happening to you." "That's not true," Damien insisted, his desperation rising. "I will do anything to make it right. I'll issue a public apology. I'll donate to the foundation. Name a price. Adrian. Anything." At that, Adrian finally turned. His face was a mask of cold fury. "A price," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You think you can put a price on what you allowed to happen? You think you can buy forgiveness for the public humiliation of my wife?" He walked slowly towards Damien, his presence filling the room, sucking all the air out of it. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. The Jensen Group and Tanaka's consortium have already sold their shares in your company. Guess who bought them?" A cold dread seized Damien. Adrian smiled, that chilling, mirthless smile. "Through a series of shell corporations, of course. As of an hour ago, I am the majority shareholder in Sterling Innovations, and as the majority shareholder, my first order of business will be to call for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. My second will be to liquidate the company's assets and shut it down permanently." Damien stared, his mind unable to process the words. Liquidate, shut it down. But why? The technology is worth billions. The patents alone. You could absorb it into Sterling Enterprises. Why destroy it because it's yours? Adrian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because I don't want your company. I don't want your patents. I want to watch you lose everything. I want you to feel the same helplessness my father felt when your father tried to destroy him. I am not just taking your company, Damien. I am erasing it. By the end of the year, it will be as if Sterling Innovations never existed. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it left Damien speechless. This wasn't a corporate takeover. This was an execution. You can't, Damien whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. I can. Adrian stated the words, an epitaph. And I will. You have 60 seconds left. I suggest you use them to say whatever last words you have. You and I will never be in the same room again. Damien looked into his cousin's implacable steel-grey eyes and saw no mercy. He saw only the finality of a judgment passed down from on high. There was nothing he could say, nothing he could offer. He had lost. His father had lost the war a generation ago, and now he had lost it again. He turned without another word and walked out of the office, a broken man. As the heavy doors closed behind him, he heard Adrian pick up his phone. Carter Adrian's voice said, calm and clear, "Proceed with the liquidation, and get my wife on the line. I want to take her to lunch." 3 months later, the dust had settled. Damien Sterling was a ghost, his company liquidated, and his name erased from the world of finance. Bianca Vance, a social pariah, had been exiled by her own family to save their crumbling reputation. In their place, Anya Sterling had risen. No longer a secret, she embraced her role as the formidable chairwoman of the Sterling Trust, captivating the public, not with her story, but with her substance. At a press conference, she launched her masterwork, the Phoenix Initiative, a fund to empower women who, like her, had been underestimated. Adrian watched from the front row, his pride evident. The scandal had not broken them. It had solidified their partnership. That evening he revealed his final move. He had quietly acquired the disgraced Vance Media. His plan wasn't to destroy it, but to gift it to Anya. Imagine the voices you can amplify, he told her. The company that tried to silence you will now become your megaphone. Anya looked out at the city, no longer a shadow, but a queen with a newly acquired kingdom, ready to reshape the world. And so, a ripped dress became the catalyst for the fall of one empire and the glorious rise of another. Anya's story teaches us that true power isn't about the clothes you wear or the name you carry, but the strength and grace you hold within. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most to say. What did you think of Adrian's ultimate revenge? Was it justice, or was it too ruthless? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these intricate tales of drama and redemption. If you were captivated by Anya's journey from the shadows into the spotlight, please don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a dose of empowerment and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable dramas. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. Thank you for listening.